Chapter 9, Until the End. Mayo, Calo. My hunch was correct all along. Even when Pyper and Kino didn't believe me, I knew there must have been some link between Kino and the Emperor, and now that everything was more evident to us, our course of action was to rescue Kino. The problem was, where the cratty hubbub's ass was he hiding? How were we to save him if we could not find him? I heard someone rapping against the door. I stood up quickly, peering at the small hole. There was no one outside. Still, I had to be careful. I opened the door slightly and looked out. A bird flew inside. It flapped its wings so vigorously that I had to cover my head. I pushed the door closed again. The bird had settled on Pyper's outstretched hand. "It must be from Elder Man," she said. Then, she examined the bird's tiny leg. There was a scroll attached to it. When Pyper had successfully retrieved the letter, the bird flew inside the room as though it wanted to go out. I had no choice but to open the door slightly ajar to let it fly. I shut the door behind it and moved towards Pyper, but her face had turned pale. She looked up at me with wide eyes. "Elder Man said that the Emperor's men attacked Nivedon. Mother was safe, but there were many casualties," she said in a trembling voice. "He said that the Nivens will take the fight to the Emperor now." I took the parchment from her and read it. It was concise and straight to the point. Nothing more. "The ghosts are going to fight the Emperor's men now," I repeated, stunned. The ghosts had kept their identities secret for so long that it felt odd to actually read that they would be rising against the Emperor. Pyper nodded slowly. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I gulped when I saw the tears because I did not know how to make anyone stop crying. I was never good with words. In fact, most of the time, if anyone was crying, it probably was because I said something stupid. But not this time. I reached out to hold Pyper's hand and gave it a squeeze, but that did not seem to be enough. She pulled me closer and hugged me tightly. I could feel her heart beating so fast, and right at that moment, I was struck with an immense feeling of loneliness. What has become of our world? Wars would mean people were dying. I could die any time too. And Pyper. And Kino. My eyes moistened from fear, and I clutched Pyper just as tightly. Moments later, the door opened, and Dogan entered the room. He looked grim as though he knew what Pyper and I had just read from the parchment. "There were talks about the Emperor looking for the last dragon's egg," he began. "If that's true, and if he gets hold of the dragon, then we stand very little chance of winning this war." I gaped at him. Pyper and I disentangled from the embrace. "Eggs only hatch if there's sufficient warmth. How would the egg even hatch if there's no mother dragon?" I said. Dogan looked taken aback. "Yeah. That's something we should think about." He walked towards us, noticing that we were crying. "What's wrong?" he asked. We told Dogan about Elder Man's letter and what it meant. Basically, we were crying because there would be a war. And a war would mean we could die anytime. And a war would mean that it would be impossible to look for Kino. "We've stayed here for too long," Pyper said. "The Emperor's men could find us anytime. I don't think we can be lucky for a lot longer." "Maybe we should leave," I said. "But where do we go? We have no idea where Kino is." "There are two things we can do now," Pyper said. "Go somewhere else and find out what the Emperor is planning. Where is he looking for the dragon's egg? If we get hold of that egg, wouldn't that mean we'd stand a better chance of winning this war? Or at least, we know that we'll be meddling with the Emperor's plans." Dogan nodded. "That was what I was about to suggest. Yes, if Kino's not here by tomorrow, we must leave. We cannot stay here forever, waiting for him to turn up," he said. I did not know what to say. I wanted Kino to be with us already, but Pyper and Dogan were right. We cannot wait forever. I moved to my bunk and laid down, thinking things over. I did not feel as good about the news Elder Man and Dogan delivered. I thought about other things, how everything could go better, but I fell asleep thinking about the possibilities and not coming up with one sound solution. Kino Amark. Grandpa had been terribly quiet ever since the incident in the boat. He said I should not dwell on it, but how could I not if he would not talk to me? Perhaps there were other things on his mind, but it was just the two of us traveling now. If he did not speak to me, I was left to my thoughts, a lot of them, and none of which was good. I sighed. It was a tiring journey, and I could not decide which was better, traveling with Grandpa or traveling with my friends. With Grandpa, I get the chance to sleep in inns. Somehow, he had connections, and people were helping us. But then, he dared not share any plans. Now, when I was with Pyper and Mayo, we would be lucky enough if we could lie down with some straw to make the ground a little softer and sleep for longer than 4 hours. Food was difficult to come by, but at least then, we talked to each other. We decided together. Grandpa, I said, no longer welcoming the silence. Where are we now? We're in Alangelan, a town in Amer, he said. I shivered at the thought. I had been to Amer before, and the experience was not entirely pleasant. General Ion Noto captured me and delivered me to the Queen. Luckily though, Pyper had helped me escape. Pyper, Arden, and Regan. I felt sad when I remembered Arden. I wished he were still here. As for Regan, I do not know what had become of the soldier who helped me. I prayed he was well. But where are we going? I asked. To your friends, as you wished, Grandpa said. In Canela? I asked. Grandpa nodded. Canela was the scariest place for me. Sinista was a horrible place, but only because of the hubbubs and other monsters that lived there. Aside from that, I would still think that Canela was, by far, the most terrifying place in the world. But what if they're not there? What you said before made sense. Your friends do not know where you are. Hence, they would wait for you somewhere they know you would be at, in case you get caught, he said. Don't worry. We will find them. He sounded very sure. Why have you been ignoring me? I blurted out. I did not intend to ask him so directly, but traveling with a companion who spoke very little made the journey quite lonely. Ignoring you? Grandpa asked. Then, he broke into a laugh. I wasn't ignoring you. He was still laughing. But if you weren't ignoring me, why weren't you talking to me? I asked. Grandpa pulled the reins of his horse and looked at me. I did the same and halted my horse. Since we started the journey, you barely had any chance to practice your power. You must master it much sooner than you think. He paused, studying me. It wasn't your fault, what happened when we were out in the waters. I blushed when I remembered my blunder. 2 men had died, and this time, I had a direct hand in the matter. But you need to master your power so that you would be able to use it well. And yet, this journey we're taking cannot be put on hold either, as you've made me understand its importance. I do agree with you. But that means that I must give you time to concentrate. Thus, you must, at all times, focus on your power even when you're riding a horse. Even when you're eating, even when you're sleeping, it should be second nature to you. I sighed. I had wanted to have power for such a long time, but that was before I learned that having power translated to so much responsibility. However, it was time to accept that. Do I need to save the world? I almost laughed at that thought. Almost. Do you understand me, Kino? Grandpa said. I looked at him, ashamed that I had let myself entertain such ridiculous thoughts. Yes, Grandpa, I do. And I promise I will keep on practicing. Good, he said. Then, he kicked at his horse and trotted off. Let's go, he yelled. My horse trotted after him. How I wish this was over. How I wish I was back again with my friends and mother, and... What was I thinking? If I could master shuffling, I would be able to use any power I had copied before. And that included, sniffling. The last sniffler may be gone, but I could copy his power before, so I must be able to do it again. I was suddenly filled with excitement at the thought that I could find my friends sooner than I had expected. I pulled my horse to a stop and closed my eyes. Please, 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 I uttered inside my head. Please work. I emptied my head of all thoughts and dulled my hearing from any sound. I just feel hollow, as though nothing consumed me. And then, I thought about Pyper. Her pretty little ashen face and all images of her I could conjure inside my head. Back to that day when I first met her. Back when she was practicing Distantecus with Mayo and me. Back when I traveled all the way to the ghost town to ask her father to let us live in Niveden. Pyper had such a pretty face. Even when she was suffering from a fever caused by the Serpetus's venom, she still looked like a fairy. And at that moment, I could almost smell her. A feeling so strong engulfed me. I opened my eyes. Grandpa was trotting back to where I was. He had probably realized that I had stopped following him. When he finally reached me, worry made the lines on his forehead go deeper. "Are you all right?" he asked. I closed my eyes again and inhaled. And then, with a smile, I opened my eyes and said, "Never been better." Grandpa looked confused, but he did not ask me any more. "Let's go," he said. "We cannot dally any longer." I nodded and trotted after him. I could sense Pyper. She was still far from where I was, but I could already sense her. And where Grandpa was heading, I could feel the gap between Pyper and me narrowing, and with a light heart, I trotted at high speed. I shouted jubilantly. And starting that moment, Sysis seemed to shine a little brighter.